Did I turn it on right? Hey, I did. Off to a good start. Well, thanks, Hunter. Thanks, everyone, for being here. Start off, thanks, Maddie, my wife, my beautiful wife. Taylor and Cassie are gone. I am honored to be able to speak tonight. Taylor approached me a couple weeks ago and said, hey, I want you to speak. He didn't say that, actually. He said, hey, you're speaking this day. And I was like, okay, cool. Well, I found out like 2 weeks ago, he was like, yeah, I asked your wife about it. And I said, hey, I think I want Brad to speak. How do I go about it? And apparently she said, you don't ask him. You just tell him he's doing it, and then he's got to do it. So here I am. I didn't have the choice in it. But honestly, I'm super thrilled about it. I'm super excited. Obviously, Miss Taylor and Cassie, and we're thankful for everything that they've done to make this possible. And just, I want to give a thanks to everyone behind the scenes. Like, now that I've been on the other side of this, of like seeing everything that goes into a week, like there was like 8 or 10 people that I had to talk to before this ever happened. And I was like, okay, what's going on back here? So shout out to all those people, because honestly, without them, this wouldn't be happening. Now, I'm excited at what's been put on my heart this week. Obviously we could sit and listen to Hunter talk about basically anything, but I mean, that word he's got going is for another time. I'm a nice guy. So I'm going to give you a heads up that I'm going to ask you to write something down in about a minute and a half. And what I want you to think about is, I want you to think about a change that you want to make in your life. It could be big, it could be small. You can write in code because you're afraid of peekers. I don't care. Just think about it. But I want to start with a little anecdote. So like probably 6, 7, maybe even 8 or 9, 10 years ago at this point, which is scary, my grandpa called me. And if you've ever seen Up, my grandpa looks like the guy from Up, like basically the exact same. That's my grandpa. And he called me and he's like, hey, I need you to come over. I have a problem with iTunes. And I was like, oh, okay, here we go. So I drove over to his house and I walk in and I was like, hey, Grandpa, what's going on? And he was like, I can't log into iTunes. Trying to listen to sermons and I can't log into iTunes. My grandpa is the holiest person you'll ever meet. And so I said, all right, well, let's log in. Let's set your password, whatever. So I go away and so I'm like, all right, we get to that point where you need to pick the password. So I said, hey, Grandpa, what do you want your password to be? And he said, oh, yeah, my password, 777 Peter. It's like, oh, man, you really are holy. Okay, 777 Peter. Enter. No. I was like, what the heck? And he said, oh, you can't use a password you've already used in the past, Grandpa. Oh, what? And he was all angry about it. No, that's my password. That's one I used. I don't want to change away from that. So he reluctantly said, okay, change my password. 777 Pedro. And I got a good laugh about it because I don't think my grandpa speaks Spanish at all. But it was funny to me. That story came to my head as I was preparing for this, and that whenever we think about making a change, even something as insignificant as just a password change, we do the bare minimum only when we're forced to do it. Like, we have to get uncomfortable and almost a little irritated before we make a change. And then we just do it out of obligation. And we're very reluctant to make a change. And then we do a 777 Pedro kind of move. And it's like, is it really a change? Or are we just going about the paces? So what I want you to do, now that you've had time to think about it, is I put notes on every seat. And what I want you to do is to write down something that you want to change in your life. And the reason I want to do that is because the first point I want to make tonight is that you need to, if you want to make a change, the world has a great grasp on how to make a change and all the steps that we need to go through to make a change. And first and foremost, we have to identify where we want to make a change in our life. We can't just wait till we get to that point where we have to make a change. If you really want to make something that lasts, you need to identify what that change is up front. And statistically speaking, if you write down a change you want to make, you're 80% more likely to go through with it. So you're welcome. You're like almost twice as likely now if you just took the time and wrote it down to make that change. So whether it's a spiritual change, whether it's a lifestyle change, big or small, we all need to be making changes. And so the world has this method of how we can make changes. And I think a lot of it is valid. And like I said, step one is identifying what you want to change. A lot of people would say next that you need to start taking the steps to make a change. You need to start putting yourself in the gym if you want to get healthier. You need to put yourself out of the drive-through line if you want to get healthier. You should probably not spend your money foolishly if you want to save up some money or pay off some debt. So you need to make the changes in order to get to that point, but you have to be willing to make sacrifices in order to make those changes. And we hate change. I mean, Taylor said it every week. Change sucks. It's not easy. We don't want to do it because it takes risk. We might have to get rid of something in our life that we want to hold on to and we like. I mean, I love Chick-fil-A. I could not do without Chick-fil-A. I literally had chicken minis for breakfast because how can you start your day any other way? But I'm not ready to get rid of that. And there's things in our lives, whether it's small like that or maybe it's we just got to get rid of the people we're hanging around with to make the changes in our life that put us in a better situation. There's going to be hard decisions to make, and it's going to take risk, and it's going to take getting uncomfortable to make those changes. Also, by world standards, if you want to make a change, you're going to want to tell someone about it. Accountability plays a huge role in making a change. Because if I just in private decide I want to be a better husband, and I never tell anyone about it, and then I ignore my kids, and I ignore my wife, and I keep going about it, then I have no way of keeping myself accountable to make those changes. If I tell my wife, hey, I want to get better, I want to spend more time with my kids, I want to lock my phone at night, I want to spend time with you intentionally, when I'm not doing it, then I've given her that accountability and that authority to call me out whenever I'm not doing it. And that's not fun. And maybe you want to do it with somebody that you're not close with, and maybe you want to do it in a way that you don't feel called out by somebody. You need to just have someone in your life that you're not close with that you can call you out and have that accountability factor. But I encourage you to do that. And I think by the world standards, that's true. But the problem is that once we've done all this, the world says, okay, figure it out. You got it. Make the change. It's all you. Put it in your hands. It's all up to you. And as Christians, that is so wrong. And that is so much unnecessary pressure that we put on ourselves. Because as soon as we fail at making that change, then we lose hope, we lose motivation, we lose any drive to make any other changes in our lives. So what I wanted to look at is, with change, there's been a word that's gone around quite a bit with change over the past couple weeks, and it's been stagnant. And stagnation is not a neutral thing. You can take perfectly good, drinkable water, and if you leave it to sit, it comes filled with disease. It has got bugs. It's gross. It smells bad. Like, that is stagnant. Stagnant is not I want to make a change in my life, and then I get to this point in my life, and I'm like, okay, this is comfortable. I think I want to be here. Whether it's spiritually, whether it's relationally, whatever it might be, you don't just stagnate does not mean we sit still. You're either moving forward in the direction of making the change, or you're stagnating. You're becoming that nasty, gross, mosquito, stinky water. Like, I don't want that in my life. If I want to make change and I want to be around people that want to make change, do I want people that stagnate? Because even if I'm doing well and I have that good, clean water in my life and that good discipline, as soon as you throw stagnation in there, the entire pool is ruined. Stagnation, not flowing or running as water or air, stale or foul from standing as a pool of water, characterized by a lack of development, advancement, or progressive movement, inactive, sluggish, or dull. None of that should describe my life, especially if I'm making a change. And we are making a change and we're making steps forward in the right direction. There should not be that stagnation. That is a backwards move. And so whenever we look at change from the perspective of what God was doing and what he did through Jesus, he set out and he said, okay, let's figure out what we want to change. And he took a look at the world and he was like, wow, you guys are dumb. We got to fix everything. We got to redo this. We got to fix it. Because he has the power to speak into existence anything. He did it in the beginning. He said, let there be light, and there was light. Let there be life, and there was life. He could have very easily gotten to that point and just said, you know what, everyone back to normal. Let's go back to where there was no sin in the world. Let's go back to where there was nothing bad or evil in the world. But he didn't, because he had a game plan in place, and he identified how he wanted to make the change and started making those steps to make the change. And the way that he made that change is through Jesus. Now, when I take it in that perspective and I think about, okay, I want to be a better husband, versus I want to change the freaking world, my problem seems very, very small. I can fix me, and I can try to fix me, but if I get the power of God behind me and I say, hey, God, you've literally changed the world. You can change my attitude. You can change my habits. You can change my lifestyles. And when we get that power behind us, it completely changes the game. Then it's not up to us. And so going kind of through those same points of identifying the change, taking the steps to make the change, and making that sacrifice, he said, yeah, I'm going to change the world, but we're all familiar, or most of us, I think Christian or not, is familiar with John 3:16. God loved the world. He gave his only son. Whoever believes in him will not perish but have everlasting life. He loved the world to make the change, and he sacrificed his only son. Nothing in my life is going to take that much sacrifice, I hope, of literally giving up my son and giving up his place and where he was at and comfortable to make a change, but that's what it took. And he didn't do it alone. The accountability factor that's involved, we need to make sure that we've got someone by our side and someone that's on our team and someone that's checked into the game plan in order for us to make the change. And I want to really hone in on just 3 or 4 verses. We're going to really simplify it, starting with John 3:16. Because I think everyone knows it and we're familiar with it, but what we don't often think about is the verse that comes right after that, John 3:17. So what it says is, God so loved the world, he gave his only son, that whoever believes in him would not perish but have everlasting life. John 3:17 says, God did not send his son into the world to condemn it, but that through him it might be saved. That's a pretty good word. That's not God sitting upstairs throwing down lightning bolts trying to smite me every time I stub my toe and say a curse word. It's him saying, I'm giving up my son so he can pay the way for you. And I think this goes hand in hand with Romans 6:23. It's on the screen. Screen's broken. So what Romans 6:23 says is that it says, for the wages of sin is death, but the gift of God is eternal life. Now, as I was preparing and I started reading this verse and I started breaking it down in my head, because I know I've heard it 100 times, but I had never really thought about what it meant. The wages of sin is death. Wages are a form of payment, but it's not just something you owe somebody. It's because you owe somebody because of the work they've done. So if you're paying the wages of sin, that means sin is working in your life. How much work are we letting sin do in our life that we owe it its wages? Do we have sin working a part-time job? Is sin my CEO? Is that stagnation in our life? Is that becoming the owner and the ruler of my life so much, though, that I'm paying it a fat salary? Because we don't pay it money. I mean, indirectly, I guess we could, but the wages of sin, what we owe sin, is death. Financial death, relational death, lifestyle death. Maybe you hate your job and you're letting sin come into your life, and that's what you owe it because you're letting it into your life and it's working its job in your life. But the beauty of all of this is that the second part of that, the gift of God, is eternal life. And you can't buy a gift. You can't earn a gift. Whether you want it or not, the gift is there for you to take. And going back in the first part of the verse of the wages of sin being death, that debt has already been paid through Jesus. There's nothing in our lives that we need to do to fulfill that debt. Even though we owe our fair share, that is the beauty and the change that God brought through Jesus, is that the wages of sin have been paid through the death of Jesus. We could either pay it through the death of our lifestyle, or the death of our health, or the death of our finances. But God already paid it. It's done. It's over. It's finished. We just have to accept the gift that's already ours because it's a gift. Therefore, 2 Corinthians 5:17, therefore, if anyone is in Christ, he is a new creation. Old things have passed away. All things have become new. Our old self has to die for us to make that change. And that might be don't get to hang out with the friends that you want to hang out with anymore. That might be you don't get to spend money the way you want to spend money anymore. There's sacrifices that have to be made, but then if we put it back into the perspective of God literally gave his son for us, and that is our payment, that washes us clean, that fulfills the debt that's owed to the sin and the stagnation that's in our life. Proverbs 3:5-6, if you're familiar with that one. I think everyone, I grew up with it pounded into my head over and over and over. And it's, now I can't forget it. Trust in the Lord with all your heart. Lean not on your own understandings. In all your ways acknowledge him and let him guide your path. So, as I was saying, we get this idea of how we want to make change, but really that step that we need to start with is not letting us figure it out. We need to basically give God the authority in our life and say, make the change. Because when you do that, you relinquish control. Then when it fails, it's not your fault. It's not disheartening. You haven't failed. We've had an instance in our life where my wife took a new job, and we thought, this is it. This is what we worked for. The stars have aligned. God is honoring us for being faithful. And then 2 months later, completely unexpectedly, that door got slammed in our face. And when you get to that point, it's real easy to think that God is not in control. But we're able to look at that instance and say, you know what? We just have to believe that the bigger plan is in place, and it's not up to us. We don't have to figure it out. And when you can get to that point of trust in your life where a change happens and you don't count something unexpected, and unexpected change that you think is on the end goal is not a loss. It's just a redirection. Matthew 36-46, I think this is where Jesus is a shining example of what happens when you get faced with adversity and you want to make a change. So to paint the picture, he just went and had dinner with all his bros, and he's like, this is great, this is my body, it's going to be broken, this is my blood, it'll be spilled for you, one of you is going to betray me. It's a whole big get-together, because he knows what's coming. In order the change that God is putting into the world, and the big change, he sees it happening, he's tuned in, he knows what's coming. So Matthew, I forgot the screen's broken, so I can't read it. Hold on one second. So here's what it says. Bear with me real quick. So after all of this, he goes into the Garden of Gethsemane, and he goes to pray. And he's got a couple guys with him. And this is literally moments, hours before the crucifixion is going to happen. And here's what happens. Then Jesus went with him to the place called Gethsemane and said to the disciples, sit here while I go over there and pray. And taking along Peter and the two sons of Zebedee, he began to be distressed and troubled. Then he said to them, my soul is deeply grieved to the point of death. Remain here, stay awake with me. And going forward a little, he fell down on his face, praying and saying, my Father, if it is possible, let this cup pass from me. Nevertheless, not as I will, but your will. So he's in this moment of, he knows what's about to happen. This is not a fun instance that's about to happen. he's literally about to be whipped, beaten, crucified, mocked, spat at. We're not talking, this is not like, he's not just getting uncomfortable to make a change in his life. It's not like he's just, I gotta give up a little bit. It's not that. He's literally about to give up his life for us. And I find this interesting because he goes and he prays. And he doesn't just willingly do it. He takes a moment and says, God, if there's any other way for this to happen, can you show it to me? Because this change that we're about to do, this does not sound fun at all. But then it goes on, and he says, he came to the disciples and found them sleeping. And he said to Peter, so you're not able to stay awake with me for 1 hour? Stay awake and pray that you will not enter into temptation. And I love this part. My spirit is willing, but the flesh is weak. And again, for the second time, he went away and prayed. My Father, if this cannot pass unless I drink it, your will must be done. So he goes back, and he's deeply troubled to the point of death, which I can't even imagine what that's like. And his buddies are all sleeping on him. And he's alone, and he's troubled, and his buddies are nowhere to be found. And he's like, guys, I'm going through a lot. I need your help. I'm gonna go pray about this some more. So for a second time, he goes and says, God, if there's any other way, please. Then he comes back after praying a second time, and his friends are sleeping again. Leaving them again after he found them sleeping, he let them sleep the third time, and it says that, and leaving them again, he went away and prayed for the third time, saying the same thing. Then he came to the disciples and said to them, are you still sleeping? Behold, the hour is near, and the Son of Man is being betrayed into the hands of sinners. Get up, let us go. Behold, the one who is betraying me is approaching. The biggest change the world has ever seen, and Jesus knows his role in this change. And yet, as much God as he is as much human. And his human nature says, my flesh is weak. My flesh says, yo, let's ditch this. This sounds terrible. But he's steadfast in his beliefs, and he says, God, if not my will, but your will be done. If I have to drink this cup, and that is the only way, then let that be the way. So I think that's encouraging in that when you want to make a change in your life, it's okay to question the changes you're about to make. But I think it's important that you understand that he didn't just ditch the plan. He went to God and he said, if there's any other way, let it be. And he was faithful and he trusted what God had instilled in his heart. He's willing to fulfill the plan to change the world, even if it takes his life. And that's a huge commitment. His human nature says, let's make sure about this, because that's a huge ask. But then we all know the story. He goes, he's taken, he's beaten maliciously. I mean, this is not G-rated stuff. This is brutal. And he knew it was coming, but he had faith that God was in control and that he would keep his word, even if the change was uncomfortable. Because he's going into it thinking, this is gonna suck. But God, if you keep your word, the change that happens because of this, resurrecting him from the grave, I mean, you're not talking like rub the paddles together and 15 seconds later. I mean, he's like dead. And he had to trust that God would keep his word and deliver him through it and help him make the change that has now brought us to where we're at and has given us this blanket statement on our lives that it's not about us. The wages of sin are death, and it's already been paid through the death of Jesus Christ. And that takes a whole lot of the stress off of us. But I think one of the biggest takeaways that we can take from the story of Jesus is that the changes that we need to make in our lives may not be for us. He went through all of that for everyone else. You may have to make those difficult changes in your life for your spouse, for your friends, for your kids, for your in-laws, for your family. It may not be for my gain. Now, I can guarantee you that the changes that you make, you will be uplifted and fulfilled with. but it may not be for you. You may see the impact in other areas of your life. But ultimately, we just have to give it up. We just have to give it up to God and say, I know I need to make the change. I need to take the steps to make the change. But ultimately, God, let your will be done. And that's a scary place to be. But when you get to that point in your life, then you don't have to stress about what's going to come next. You don't have to stress about the changes that you have to make in your life. Because you can get to that point and say, the plan is already laid out. God's will be done, not mine. So, with the items that you wrote down, I encourage you to start first with God to make that change. And if that first step is, I don't even know who God is, that's a great first step, because honestly, that solves a heck of a lot of other problems. But then you need to make sure you have that accountability. Tell somebody about that, because the change that you're trying to make in your life, that is one big change. That if you say, I'm going to put God first, and if you use that on whatever you wrote down, that'll take you way further than you could ever take yourself. And we just have to trust God to take us from there and to see us through the hard times of the change. If there's anyone here at all that you think it's time for change, then come talk to me after the service. Personally, walk up to me and just say, I need to make a change. And if you want accountability in your life on the change that you wanted to make, hand me the paper. I won't read it. You don't have to put your name on it, but I'll pray for you and I'll keep you accountable spiritually. And if you want me to help you through it, I'll help you through it. But I think it's incredibly important to do. And to get a game plan in place in order to make those changes in your life. But ultimately, where it needs to start is with God being first in your life. I hope that helped somebody. This week was one of those weeks where I thought, man, I hope what I say helps somebody. And then I started going through it and I thought, oh man, that helped me. So get in the Word. It's convicting in the best way possible. But I encourage you to make that change.